Trainer told black woman, "This gym isn't for you." Went pale. When she set a national record that afternoon, "I'm going to be straight with you." He said it the way men say things when they want the cruelty to sound like kindness. Measured. Regretful, almost. The voice of someone doing you a favor you didn't ask for, and wouldn't want if you understood it correctly. "This gym isn't really for you." The words landed in the middle of a Tuesday morning in a weight room that smelled of chalk and rubber matting and the specific metallic sharpness of serious iron. There were 8 other people in that room. 6 of them heard it. 5 of them looked somewhere else. The man who said it was Craig Ellison, head trainer, 12 years at the Pinnacle Athletic Performance Center in Columbus, Ohio. His name was on the wall, near the entrance, in a framed photograph taken at a regional powerlifting competition in 2009, where he had placed 4th. The woman he said it to was Adeze Nwosu. She was standing at the squat rack in lifting shoes, a knee sleeve in her hand, having arrived 40 minutes before her scheduled training session to warm up properly, the way she always did, the way she had done for 11 years. She looked at Craig Ellison. She did not put down the knee sleeve. She did not step back from the rack. She looked at him with the quiet steadiness of someone who has spent a significant portion of her life being told that spaces were not for her and who has over that time developed a specific and durable relationship with that particular lie. "I have a session booked," she said. "That's what I'm saying," Craig said. "You booked through the open portal. But this facility we're a performance training center. We work with competitive athletes. There's a process. There's a vetting." "I know what you are," Adeze said. Craig blinked. "I've been here before," she said. "4 times in the last 3 years. I have a membership." He looked at her. He had the expression of a man whose script has run out of lines. "I'm just saying," he said, "that the equipment in here is calibrated for, some of this stuff if you're not used to it." "I'm used to it," Adeze said. She turned back to the rack. She adjusted her grip position. She loaded a plate. Craig Ellison stood behind her for a moment. Then he walked away. 4 hours later, in the competition hall 2 miles across the city, in front of 400 people and a National Federation panel, and a camera live streaming to 11,000 online viewers, Adeze Nwosu set a new national record in the raw squat for her weight class. When the lift was confirmed, she looked up at the scoreboard. She did not scream. She did not cry. She breathed out slowly, the way you breathe when something you have been building for a long time has finally arrived at the place it was always going. Craig Ellison, who had driven to the meet as a spectator because 2 of his client athletes were competing, was standing 20 feet from the platform when it happened. He had seen her walk in. He had not gone pale exactly, but the color in his face had done something, quietly and involuntarily, that his face would not have chosen to do if it had been given the option. Wait. The man told her the gym wasn't for her on the same morning she went across town and set a national record. And he was standing right there when she did it. I need you to understand exactly who Adeze Nwosu is, because this story goes back further than that Tuesday morning, and where it starts is the part that makes everything else make sense. Let's get into it. Adeze Chisom Nwosu was born in Columbus, Ohio, the second of 3 children of Chukwuemeka and Blessing Nwosu, who had come to Ohio from Enugu State in southeastern Nigeria in the late 1980s, had built a life in the east side of Columbus with the specific patience and precision of people who understood that the life you wanted was not the life you were handed, and that the distance between the two was crossed one correct decision at a time. Chukwuemeka drove a school bus for Columbus City Schools for 26 years. He drove the same route for most of those years, knew most of the children by name within a month of school starting, kept hard candy in a paper bag in the seat side pocket of the driver's compartment, and was, by every measure available to the children who rode his bus, the most reliable person in their morning. He was not an effusive man. He showed up. He showed up every day, on time, in weather that should have kept reasonable people indoors, and he never once, in 26 years, failed to finish his route. Blessing Nwosu was a registered nurse who worked evening shifts at a hospital on the south side of Columbus, so that one parent was always home in the morning, and one was always home at night. She had gone back to school for her nursing degree after her second child was born, taking classes in the afternoon while Chukwuemeka was on his route, studying at the kitchen table after the children were in bed. She finished her degree in 3 years. She worked nights for 16 years. She did it without complaint and without making her children feel the weight of it, which is a different kind of strength than the kind that gets recognized publicly, but is not a lesser kind. Adize grew up in a house where showing up was not optional, and where the value of a thing was measured by the work you were willing to put into it. She had her father's stillness and her mother's endurance, and she did not discover, until she was 13 years old, that those two things together made her capable of something specific and extraordinary. She had been running track. A physical education teacher noticed that she ran differently from the other kids. Not faster, exactly, but with more intent, more economy of effort, like someone who understood that energy was a resource and waste was a choice. He mentioned it to the track coach. The track coach watched her in one practice and told her she should try the sprints and the field events both, and see which one felt right. She threw the shot put for the first time on a Thursday afternoon in October. She was 13 years old. She threw it 16 feet on her first attempt, which was not remarkable in absolute terms, but was remarkable for a first attempt. And the coach had looked at the landing mark and then looked at her and said, "Do that again." She did it again. 17 feet, 2 inches. She kept going, each throw a little further than the last, the mechanics adjusting in real time the way a gifted athlete's body adjusts when it recognizes the task. By the end of that practice, she had thrown 20 feet. The coach looked at her and said, "You're going to be something." She was something. She was something in a way that accumulated slowly at first, and then rapidly, the way certain things compound. She threw in high school, and she threw in club competitions in the summers, and she watched footage of elite throwers the way other teenagers watched. Music videos, analytically, obsessively, with a notepad nearby to write down what she observed. She went to a state university on a partial athletic scholarship, majored in kinesiology, and competed in the throwing events all 4 years, setting program records in the shot put and the weight throw, and leaving as a 2-time All-American. After college, she made the decision that most people in her position do not make, because most people in her position are made to feel that it is unrealistic. She decided to train for the national championships, not as a side project, not as a hobby, as a pursuit, the way her father had pursued his route every morning, and her mother had pursued her degree at the kitchen table. With full attention, and without apology. She worked. She coached herself for the first 2 years because she couldn't afford a high-level coach and was not willing to take a bad one just to say she had one. She built her own training logs, video analyzed her own technique, read everything written in English about the biomechanics of rotational throwing, and corresponded by email with 3 retired world-class shot-put coaches who answered her questions, because her questions were good enough to deserve answers. She got a job as a strength and conditioning coach at a local high school, which gave her gym access and a schedule she could train around, and a daily reminder of why the work mattered. She trained in the mornings before school, on her lunch break, and twice on Saturdays. She competed in regional meets on weekends when she could afford the travel. She was 31 years old. She had been competing at the national level for 7 years. Her best mark before this season was a personal best of 62 meters in the raw squat, which is not a shot put metric, because by the time she was 25 she had added powerlifting to her training program as a strength foundation, fell in love with it as a discipline in its own right, and had been competing seriously in raw powerlifting for 5 years. Her current national ranking in her weight class was second. She had been second for 2 years. The woman ranked first had set the record at 19.04 meters, a number that Adize had written on a piece of paper and taped to the wall above her training log for 8 months. This Tuesday was the day of the National Raw Powerlifting Federation's Open Championships, held annually in Columbus, which was convenient, and which she treated with the specific irony of a person who has trained for something for years and finds that the defining moment will happen 4 miles from her childhood home. She had arrived at the Pinnacle Athletic Performance Center that morning for a final warm-up session. She had a membership. She had trained there 4 times in the past 3 years. She had booked the session through the member portal, the way members book sessions. Craig Ellison had walked up to the squat rack and told her the gym wasn't for her. She had loaded her plates and warmed up anyway. Craig Ellison had been head trainer at Pinnacle for 12 years, and he had the particular confidence of a man who had never been seriously wrong about anything in a context that required him to know it. He was a former competitive powerlifter himself, regional level, genuinely strong, legitimately knowledgeable about the technical aspects of the sport. The problem with Craig was not that he didn't know the sport. The problem was that, over 12 years of being the most accomplished person in a room full of people who deferred to him, he had developed a model of who belonged in a serious training environment, and that model was almost entirely based on who he had seen in serious training environments before, which meant it was almost entirely based on who had already been let in. He had not looked at Adaize's training history. He had not asked her about her competition record. He had looked at her and made a determination in under 30 seconds, and the determination was not about her strength or her technique or her experience. It was about the story he had already decided she was part of. The 6 people in the gym who had heard him were in various stages of discomfort. 2 of them were regular members who had known Craig for years and had never heard him say anything that obviously required a response, and they were now in the situation of people who have watched something happen and have to decide, in real time, whether they are the kind of person who says something. One of them was a woman named Keisha, a competitive Olympic weightlifter who had been training at Pinnacle for 2 years. She had heard what Craig said clearly. She was at the dumbbell rack 10 feet away. She looked at Adaize. Adaize was already loading the barbell. Adaize did not look back at her. Keisha put down the dumbbell she was holding. She walked over to the squat rack. "You need a spotter?" she said. Adaize looked at her. Something in her face just briefly acknowledged what the offer meant. "I'm good for warm-ups," Adaize said. "But if you're around in about 20 minutes, yeah." Keisha nodded. She went back to her dumbbells. Craig, standing near the trainer's desk at the edge of the floor, watched this. He said nothing. Adaize trained for 40 minutes. She did not train at competition intensity. This was activation work, movement calibration, nervous system preparation. She moved through her warm-up sequence with the focused efficiency of someone who has done this so many times that her body knows the checklist. Without being told, hip circles, banded walks, box squats at 60%, a set of pause squats at 70, a single at 80, clean and controlled. Keisha watching from beside the rack with the attentive posture of an athlete who recognizes another athlete's preparation. Craig watched from the trainer's desk for the first 15 minutes. Then a client arrived for a session, and he stopped watching. He did not come back to the squat rack. He did not apologize. He did not ask Adaize anything about what she was training for. He moved through his morning the way people move through mornings when they have decided that the thing they said was not a thing that requires revisiting. When Adaize finished, she stripped the bar, re-racked the plates, wiped down the equipment. She looked around the gym with the composed expression of someone who has taken what they came for and is leaving the rest behind. At the door, she stopped. She turned and found Keisha. "Thank you," she said. "Go do what you came to do," Keisha said. Adaize left. The National Raw Powerlifting Federation Open Championships were held at the Greater Columbus Convention Center, in a competition hall that had been set up with a regulation platform, competition lighting, a full electronic scoring system, and seating for 400 spectators. There were athletes competing across 12 weight classes from 31 states. There were federation judges, equipment inspectors, a medical team, and a camera rig live streaming to the federation's online platform. Adaize arrived 2 hours before her first lift. She signed in. She went through equipment check. She found her warm-up area and began moving through her protocols with the unhurried precision she had developed over 5 years of competition. The same protocols she had done at the squat rack at Pinnacle that morning, now extended and deepened. Her coach, a former national champion named Darius, who had been working with her for 3 years, and who had a reputation for saying very little and being right about everything he said, watched her warm up and said 4 words: "You're moving like today." She knew what he meant. There are training days, and there are competition days, and there are days that are different from both. Days when the body and the mind and the years of work behind them are all pointing in the same direction at the same moment. Those days do not announce themselves loudly. They announce themselves in the quality of a warm-up set, in the way the bar feels at the bottom of the hole, in the specific ease that has no business being there at heavy weights and is, when it appears, the sign of something significant coming. She was moving like today. The squat was the first discipline. Adaise's opening attempt was 165 kilograms, a weight she had hit in training. 17 times in the last 4 months, a weight she could lift in her sleep. She walked it out. She descended with control and patience and came up clean and white-lighted by all 3 judges. The crowd, 400 people deep, made the sound crowds make at a lift that looks inevitable. Her second attempt was 175 kilograms, another white light, clean, a little faster off the bottom than the first one, which meant the bar was moving, the way bars move on the good days. Her third attempt, the record attempt, was listed at 192 kilograms. The current national record was 195 kilograms. Darius had entered the attempt at warm-up. He had watched her third warm-up set and had not hesitated for a second. The hall went quiet with the specific hush that falls over a competition space when a significant lift is about to be attempted. 11,000 online viewers were watching a number on a stream. 400 people in a hall in Columbus, Ohio, were watching a woman stand behind a loaded barbell. Adaise chalked her hands. She stepped up to the bar. She stood there for a moment. Not a long moment, not a dramatic one, just long enough to do what she had trained herself to do before a maximal attempt, which was to find the place inside herself that was not nervous and not excited, and not anything other than ready. It was a place she knew well. She had been building it for 11 years. She unracked the bar. She took her steps back. She set her stance. She squatted, down to depth, the crease of her hip below the plane of her knee, controlled and patient and unhurried. Then up, the drive off the bottom, the bar moving through the sticking point with the authority of something that was not going to be stopped. Up, fully locked out, the bar motionless at the top. 3 white lights, 192 kilograms, a new national record. The hall came up out of its seats. The sound was physical. Adaise stood under the bar for a moment, before she racked it, looking at the number on the scoreboard, breathing. Darius was at the edge of the platform. He was not a demonstrative man, but he was smiling in a way that his face did not usually do. A wide, full, entirely uncontrolled smile that he made no effort to contain. Adaise racked the bar. She stepped off the platform. She found Darius. He said 2 words. There it is, she nodded. She was not crying. She was something past crying. Some state on the other side of it where the emotion has been displayed by a profound and settled calm that is its own kind of expression. She had been trying to get here for 2 years. She was here. Craig Ellison had arrived at the convention center at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, 3 hours into the competition. He had 2 client athletes competing in the afternoon sessions, and he came to every competition where his clients were lifting, which was, by any measure, a professional practice that spoke to his commitment to the people he coached. He was standing in the spectator area when Adaise's name was announced for her third attempt. He recognized the name. He did not immediately connect it. The morning had passed and he had moved through it the way he moved through mornings. And the woman at the squat rack had been filed under a category that his mind did not return to without a reason. Then he saw her walk to the platform. The recognition happened in stages. The lifting shoes, the way she moved to the bar, the knee sleeves, the chalk on the hands, and then the lift itself, 192 kilograms, white-lighted confirmed, a number appearing on the scoreboard beside her name above the words, National Record. He stood in the spectator area and watched it happen. The color in his face did what color does in such moments, not a dramatic change, a quiet one. The kind that happens when a realization arrives from an angle you weren't protecting. He stood there through the crowd's response. He stood there while the Federation announcer confirmed the record. He stood there while Adaise stepped off the platform and found her coach and received the full-face smile of a man who was proud of her in the specific way that coaches are proud when an athlete has arrived somewhere they helped build the road to. He stood there with the knowledge of what he had said at 9 o'clock that morning sitting somewhere in his chest, and it sat there differently now than it had sat there then. His name was Craig Ellison, and he had placed 4th at a regional competition in 2009. That was the photograph on the wall. That was the thing he had been most proud of in this sport, professionally. Adaise Nwosu had just set a national record. In the gym, he had told her wasn't for her. 4 hours earlier. Okay, we have to stop here for a second because I need you to sit with that timeline. 9 in the morning. This gym isn't for you. 1 in the afternoon. National record. Same day. Same woman. Same weight room she had been training in for 3 years while he apparently never once looked at her. Competition history, which is publicly listed in the Federation database, that anyone with a membership to a powerlifting-adjacent performance center might reasonably be expected to check before telling a ranked national-level athlete that she doesn't belong in a serious training environment. Let me tell you what happened after the lift. Because this is where it gets real. The story did not travel the way some stories travel, explosively, overnight, in a single viral moment. It traveled the way certain truths travel, carefully, carried by people who had witnessed something and could not put it down. Keisha, the Olympic weightlifter who had offered to spot Adesanya at the squat rack that morning, had been watching the live stream on her phone at the gym that afternoon, between her own training sets. She saw the lift. She saw the record. She sat with her phone in her hand for a few minutes. Then she posted. She did not name Craig directly. She described what she had witnessed. A woman had come in to warm up on the morning of a national competition. A trainer had told her the gym wasn't for her. She had trained anyway. And 4 hours later she had set a national record. That was the whole post, no outrage language, no demands. Just a sequence of events. Stated plainly. The post had 600 shares by midnight. By the following morning it had 12,000. By the afternoon of the day after the competition, a reporter from a sports website had reached out to Keisha, and a different reporter had reached out to the National Raw Powerlifting Federation, and a third reporter was trying to reach Adesanya through the Federation's athlete contact portal. Adesanya's phone had been receiving messages since the previous evening. She had read them. She had replied to a handful of people she knew personally. She had not replied to media inquiries, because she was sitting in her parents' kitchen in East Columbus eating jollof rice that her mother had made, on the occasion of the national record, and her father was at the head of the table, being quiet, in the way he was quiet when he was most full, and her younger brother was trying to get her to agree that he had spotted her potential before anyone else, which was categorically untrue but was funny, and her older sister had driven in from Dayton and was crying in a way that made everyone at the table slightly emotional in turn, and Adesanya did not want to be anywhere else. She talked to the reporter on Friday, 2 days after the competition. She was careful and she was honest. She said that she had been training at Pinnacle for 3 years with a valid membership and had been told that morning that the facility wasn't appropriate for her. She said she had trained anyway, and then gone to the competition. She said she believed the trainer's comments were connected to how she looked, not to her record or her credentials, because he had made his assessment before asking her a single question about either. She said she was not interested in a public campaign against an individual. She said she was interested in the pattern because the pattern was not about one gym or one trainer. It was about who gets assumed to belong somewhere before they've proven anything, and who has to prove something before they're allowed to belong. The reporter wrote it exactly as she said it. The piece ran on Saturday morning. The Pinnacle Athletic Performance Center's management was aware of the story before it ran. The gym's owner, a man named Phil Garrett, who had founded Pinnacle 19 years earlier, and who prided himself on the facility's reputation as a serious performance environment open to competitive athletes at all levels, had received 3 calls from athletes who were members of the gym and who had heard about what happened, and who had mentioned in their calls that they were reconsidering their memberships. He had also received Keisha's post, forwarded by his facility manager, and he had read the post and gone to the training floor to find Craig and asked him directly what had happened. Craig had described the interaction. He had framed it as a misunderstanding, a concern about equipment and liability, a miscommunication. He had not described it with the specificity of someone who was fully confident in his own account. Phil Garrett had been around competitive strength sports for 30 years. He knew what "this gym isn't for you" meant when said by a male trainer to a black woman at a squat rack. He had known it the moment he'd heard the summary. He had simply needed to confirm it. He told Craig to take the week off. He didn't phrase it as a suspension. He phrased it as time to think. But both men understood what it was. After the press piece ran, Phil called Adesanya directly. He had found her number through the Federation's athlete liaison. He introduced himself. He told her what he had done. He told her he was sorry that it had happened in his facility, that the response should have come from him before she'd had to speak to a journalist about it, and that he was committed to making sure the kind of assumption that Craig had made was not something his facility's culture produced or protected. He then said something that he had spent 2 days deciding whether to say. "I'd like to offer you a complimentary training membership," he said. "Not to make this go away. I know that's not what this is about. But because you are the kind of athlete this facility should have been trying to recruit, and instead you had to fight to get through the door." Adaze was quiet for a moment. "I appreciate that," she said. "I'll think about it." She was not dismissive. She was the kind of person who takes things seriously and needed to think about what the offer represented and what accepting it meant, and whether it was the right next thing. She called Darius. She said, "The gym owner called." Darius said, "What do you want to do?" She said, "I want to train somewhere that treats athletes like athletes." Darius said, "That's a yes then." She said, "That's a yes then." Craig Ellison resigned from Pinnacle Athletic Performance Center 2 weeks after the competition. He issued a written statement that Phil shared with the press piece's reporter, who published it as a follow-up. The statement said that he had made assumptions that morning that were wrong, that he had not given the member the consideration her record and her membership entitled her to, and that he regretted the impact his comments had had on her preparation for a competition in which she had achieved something remarkable. The statement did not use the word racist. Craig Ellison was not able, in writing, to use that word about himself, even in a description of a moment that he could not honestly account for with any other word. What he was able to do, and did do, in a separate and private letter that he sent directly to Adaze through the facility, was say more than the public statement said. He said he had been wrong, in a way that was about more than a misjudgment. He said he had been in this sport for 20 years and he had told himself a story about what serious athletes looked like, and he had never examined that story, and the cost of not examining it had been paid by someone else, and that was not acceptable. He said he was not asking for anything from her. He said he just wanted her to know that he understood what he had done, and was not going to pretend that he didn't. Adaze read the letter. She put it down. She picked it up and read it again. She did not respond. That was her right, and she exercised it. But she kept the letter. She kept it because it was honest in a way that the public statement had not been, and because she believed that honesty, when it finally arrives, deserves to be acknowledged even when it's late. The national record stood for 14 months. Then Adaze broke it herself. At the following year's national championships, held in Denver, she totaled a new personal best across all 3 disciplines and set a new national record in the squat of 196. 5 kilograms, 4.5 kilograms above the mark she had set in Columbus on the Tuesday morning, after the worst warm-up session of her career. Darius, watching from the edge of the platform, said 2 words again. He always said 2 words. He had a gift for compression. "Keep going," he said. She kept going. Pinnacle Athletic Performance Center looked different by the following spring. Phil Garrett had brought in a consultancy that specialized in organizational culture in sports facilities, and the process had been thorough and not entirely comfortable, which Phil had been told to expect and had decided was the point. They had revised the staff training protocols, the membership assessment process, the way front desk staff were trained to welcome athletes who did not look like the majority of the gym's existing clientele. They had added a diversity of competitive athletes to the promotional materials on the gym's website, not performatively, but as a reflection of who was actually training there, which turned out to be more diverse than the gym's public-facing identity had suggested. They had put a new plaque near the entrance. It listed the competitive achievements of Pinnacle members. At the top, in the most recent editions, were Adaze Nwosu's national record marks, alongside the date of the competition and the city. The date was the Tuesday in Columbus. Keisha, who had offered to spot Adaze at the squat rack that morning, saw the plaque on a Thursday afternoon when she came in for training. She stood in front of it for a moment. She took a photograph of it on her phone. She sent the photograph to Adaze with a single line of text. "Your name is on the wall." Adaze sent back 3 words. "Should have been there." Keisha laughed for a long time. Adaze Nwosu was invited, 18 months after the national championships, to speak at a conference for strength sports coaches and athletic performance professionals in Chicago. The topic of her talk was athletic development pathways for underrepresented athletes in strength sports. She spoke for 35 minutes. She was precise, and she was funny, and she was hard to argue with, because she spoke from a combination of personal experience and the kinesiology degree she had put to work in her career, and the 11 years of training logs she had kept, with the same methodical care her father had brought to his bus route. She talked about the biomechanics of the squat. She talked about the training periodization model she and Darius had developed over 3 years. She talked about what it cost a young athlete, in time, in confidence, in the specific kind of energy that cannot be recovered, to spend part of every training experience managing the question of whether they were welcome, rather than spending that energy on the work. She talked about the Tuesday morning. She did not talk about it as a trauma. She talked about it as a data point. She said that the interesting thing about that morning, looking back, was not the comment itself. The interesting thing was the assumption behind the comment. The assumption that she was new to this, that she had walked into a serious space without knowing what it was, that she needed to be redirected rather than welcomed. The assumption had been so complete that Craig Ellison had not thought to ask a single question before rendering his judgment. "I have been in this sport for 11 years, she said. "I have competed at the national level for 5. My membership to that facility was current. My name was in the Federation database. None of that information required any special access. All of it required 30 seconds and a Google search." She paused. "The barrier to seeing me was not information," she said. "The barrier to seeing me was the story that someone had already decided to tell about who I was before I walked through the door. And that story was not about me. That story was about him." The room was quiet in the way rooms are quiet when something true has been said plainly. "The solution," she said, "is not for athletes who look like me to lift heavier. We're already lifting heavy. The solution is for the people who run the rooms to ask the question before they give the answer. It takes 30 seconds. It costs nothing, and it might change what you see." After the conference, a young woman came up to her. She was maybe 19-20. She was wearing a team jacket from a university lifting club. She had the hands of someone who spent a lot of time under a barbell. She said, "I was told something similar at my school gym by a coach." Adaze looked at her. "What did you do?" Adaze asked. "I kept training," the young woman said. "Good," Adaze said. She paused. "What's your best squat?" The young woman told her. Adaze nodded slowly, with the specific expression of someone running a number against a context and reaching a conclusion. "Come find me before you leave," she said. "I want to give you Darius's email." The young woman looked at her. "He's a good coach," Adaze said. "You should talk to him." Her parents came to the Denver Championships. Chukwuemeka sat in the third row in a jacket and tie, the same jacket and tie he had worn to her college graduation and to her first national appearance, and to every occasion he judged worth dressing for, which was every occasion involving his children. Blessing sat beside him in a dress the color of the Pinnacle plaque's gold lettering, and when Adaze hit 196.5 and the white lights came up and the scoreboard showed national record, Blessing covered her mouth with both hands, and Chukwuemeka sat very still and very upright, and his face was the face of a man who has spent 26 years driving a bus route in the dark and cold so that someone else could get somewhere, and who has arrived in a convention center in Denver, Colorado at the destination. He did not stand up when the hall stood up. He did not need to. He pressed both hands together in his lap, the way his father had taught him to sit when something required more than words. His daughter was on the platform. She had carried more weight than most people knew, in more ways than the barbell measured. She had carried it without complaint and without losing her form. The record was hers. Everything she had built toward was hers. The room was on its feet, and Chukwuemeka Nwosu sat in the third row, with his hands pressed together, and let it be everything it was. All right. I have to just sit with that image for a second. Chukwuemeka in his jacket and tie, hands pressed together, not needing to stand because he was already holding everything. That whole family, the bus route, the nursing degree studied at the kitchen table, the hard candy in the seatside pocket, all of it pointing to this room, this record, this moment. This story is fiction. Adaze Nwosu is not a real person. But Craig Ellison, the specific kind of person Craig Ellison is, he's real. The decision he made at a squat rack in under 30 seconds, without one question asked. Real. The Keishas of the world who put down what they're doing and walk over and offer to spot someone. Real. The young women in university lifting club jackets with barbell hands who get told something similar and keep training. Absolutely, completely real. And here is what I want to ask you, because we talk about the big moments, the national records, the platform, the scoreboard. But what about the Tuesday morning? What about the moment before the record, when there was no crowd and no scoreboard, and someone was telling you that you didn't belong somewhere you had every right to be? How many Tuesdays did you have before your defining moment? How many times did you load the bar and train anyway? In a room that hadn't decided to see you yet? Tell me in the comments, I want to know. Because I think those Tuesday mornings are the real story, and the people who make it through them deserve to have that part told too. If this one hit you somewhere, please hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you're not already here. We tell these stories every week, and we're not stopping. Keep going. The record is waiting.